Imagine this, you're hiking, miles from civilization. The only sounds are your own footsteps and the wind whistling through the trees. You round a bend, and there he is, a lone hiker, looking lost. He asks for help, his voice raspy, his eyes filled with a strange intensity. You offer assistance, but something feels off. An unsettling feeling creeps up your spine. What you don't know is that this chance encounter will lead you down a rabbit hole of mystery and fear. This is the story of the Phantom Hiker, a tale whispered among those who dare to venture into the wilderness. The mountain loomed large, its peak shrouded in a veil of mist. Mount Baker, a formidable giant, had seen its fair share of triumphs and tragedies. For years, locals whispered tales of strange occurrences on its slopes, unexplained lights, eerie sounds, and fleeting glimpses of a solitary figure. The hikers, undeterred, ventured deeper into the mountain's embrace. As they approached Devil's Elbow, a sense of unease settled over the group. Who was this stranger, standing alone in the wilderness, and what was his story? Mount Baker, like many mountains, was steeped in folklore, its history intertwined with tales of the supernatural. Locals spoke of a phantom hiker, a solitary figure said to haunt the trails. Some dismissed these stories as mere superstition. Others whispered of a tragedy that had left its mark on the land. The story spoke of a young man named Samuel, an avid hiker who vanished. He was well equipped and familiar with the mountain's trails. But Samuel had vanished without a trace. Search parties scoured the mountain for weeks. Days turned into weeks, and still, there was no sign of Samuel. The search was eventually called off, the case remaining unsolved. Years passed, and the memory of Samuel's disappearance faded into obscurity. But the mountain, it seemed, held on to its secrets. Hikers reported seeing a lone figure on the trails, a figure that matched Samuel's description. Some claimed to have spoken to him, describing a man disoriented and confused. These encounters were fleeting, the figure vanishing as quickly as it appeared. The legend of the Phantom Hiker took root, a chilling reminder of the mountain's untamed power. The hikers making their way up Mount Baker that day were aware of the stories. They were prepared for the physical challenges of the mountain. What they were not prepared for was the possibility that the legend of the Phantom Hiker was more than just a story. As they approached Devil's Elbow, a shiver ran down their spines. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a name: Samuel. Devil's Elbow was aptly named. A sharp bend in the trail, it clung precariously to the mountainside, a sheer drop-off on one side, a towering rock face on the other. The wind funneled through the narrow passage, howled like a banshee, whipping at their jackets and sending shivers down their spines. The hikers huddled closer, their earlier exuberance replaced by a palpable tension. Even Mark, usually the picture of confidence, seemed ill at ease, his gaze darting nervously from the shadowy figure to the treacherous path ahead. They had heard the stories, of course. Who hasn't when venturing into the wilderness? Legends of lost souls, phantom hikers, whispers on the wind. But those were just stories, weren't they? Told to frighten children around a campfire, to add a thrill to an otherwise ordinary hike. Yet, as they rounded the bend and came face to face with the lone figure, a shiver ran down their spines, a primal instinct that whispered of danger, of something not quite right. The figure stood motionless, silhouetted against the darkening sky, his back to them. He wore a dark hooded jacket, the kind popular with hikers decades ago, and a backpack that looked older than time itself. A shiver ran down Emily's spine. She couldn't explain it, but something about the way he stood, the way he seemed to blend into the landscape, sent a chill down her spine. It was as if he were a part of the mountain itself, a shadow given form. "Hello?" Mark called out, his voice barely a whisper against the wind. "Are you all right?" The figure remained still, as if he hadn't heard. The hikers exchanged nervous glances. The sun was sinking fast, casting long, eerie shadows that danced and twisted like phantoms in the fading light. They were running out of daylight, and the thought of being stranded on the mountain as darkness fell, with this strange, silent figure, was unsettling to say the least. Slowly, as if in slow motion, the figure turned. His face, hidden beneath the shadow of the hood, was obscured, but the hikers could feel his gaze, heavy and intense. A collective gasp escaped their lips. There was something unsettling about his eyes, a strange intensity that seemed to pierce through them. For a moment no one spoke, no one dared to breathe. The only sound was the wind, whistling through the trees. I seem to be lost, the figure finally spoke, his voice raspy. He coughed, a dry, hacking sound. Can you help me? His words, though simple, hung in the air, thick with an unspoken plea. They had come across lost hikers before, it was all part of the unwritten code of the mountains. But there was something about this man, something in his eyes, that made them hesitate. Mark asked, his voice cautious, trying to sound more confident than he felt. The man gestured vaguely down the trail, his gloved hand trembling slightly. The ranger station, he croaked. I need to report. I need to... His voice trailed off, his eyes darting nervously around. Emily felt a knot of unease twist in her stomach. The ranger station was in the opposite direction, miles down the mountain. What was this man doing up here, alone at this time of day? You're going the wrong way, John, another hiker in their group blurted out. The ranger station is back that way. He pointed down the trail in the direction they had just come from. The man turned his gaze to John, his eyes narrowing slightly. For a moment, a flicker of something crossed his features, something that looked suspiciously like anger, or perhaps fear. Then just as quickly it was gone, replaced by a mask of confusion. A wave of unease washed over the group. The man's disorientation, his insistence on heading in the wrong direction, his strange demeanor, it all set off alarm bells in their minds. They had heard the stories, the whispers of a phantom hiker, a lost soul forever wandering the mountain. Could this be him? The thought sent a shiver down their spines. They were experienced hikers, rational people who didn't believe in ghost stories. And yet, standing there, face to face with this strange, unsettling figure, they couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. Mark, ever the pragmatist, tried to rationalize the situation. Perhaps the man was simply disoriented, suffering from altitude sickness or dehydration. It wasn't uncommon for hikers to become confused at high altitudes, their judgment clouded by the thin air. Look, he said, his voice firm but kind, it's getting late and we need to get down the mountain. Why don't you come with us? We can get you to the ranger station safely. The man hesitated, his gaze darting between the hikers as if weighing his options. I appreciate the offer, he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. But I need to go this way. He gestured again down the trail, his voice taking on an edge of urgency. It's important. I have to... He stopped abruptly, his eyes widening as if he had said too much. He clutched at his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Please, he wheezed, just tell me how to get to the ranger station. The hikers exchanged uneasy glances. The man's insistence on heading in the wrong direction, his erratic behavior, it was all starting to feel unnerving. Emily felt a prickle of fear run down her spine. She had a bad feeling about this, a deep-seated intuition that told her they should turn back, that they should get as far away from this man as possible. But before she could voice her concerns, Mark spoke up, his voice firm with the decision made. Look, Mark said, his voice firm but kind, we can argue about which way to go later. It's getting dark, and it's not safe to be out here alone. He gestured towards the rapidly fading light. Come on, at least let us walk with you until we find a safe place to stop for the night. Even though Mark tried to sound reassuring, Emily could see the doubt etched on his face. They all felt it. The growing unease, the prickling sensation of being watched, the subtle shift in the atmosphere that whispered of something amiss. The stranger hesitated, his gaze darting between each of their faces. His gloved hand tightened around his walking stick, his knuckles white with tension. Emily noticed that his gloves were worn, almost threadbare in places, and his boots looked older than she was. Please, he rasped, his voice cracking with desperation. I just need to get to the ranger station. There's something I need to tell them, something important. All right, Mark said, holding up his hands in a gesture of appeasement. We'll help you, but you have to promise to let us guide you. This trail can be treacherous in the dark, especially if you're not familiar with it. The stranger seemed to relax slightly, a flicker of relief crossing his features. He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the ground. Thank you, he mumbled, thank you so much. As they fell into step behind the stranger, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were making a mistake. His shoulders slumped with exhaustion, his head hung low, and yet, there was a strange spring in his step, a sense of urgency that belied his frail appearance. It was as if he were being drawn forward by an invisible force, a force that filled her with a growing sense of dread. The wind howled through the trees, whipping their jackets around them and carrying with it the faintest of whispers like a voice from beyond the grave. Uneasy truce, walking with a ghost. The trail wound through a dense forest, shadows deepening. The stranger walked ahead, silent, his presence unsettling. Emily studied his unnatural grace, his piercing eyes. Mark tried to break the silence, but the stranger remained distant. The forest seemed to watch them, a silence pregnant with secrets. Emily reached for Mark's hand, seeking comfort. Disturbing discoveries, echoes of the past. The stranger stopped, sensing something. Emily shivered, wanting to turn back. The stranger's face showed horror as he stumbled. Emily saw a human bone in the undergrowth. The stranger mumbled incoherently, fear in his eyes. Emily wondered what he had seen. Whispers from the past. The search for Samuel. Samuel's disappearance spread through the town. Search teams combed the mountain, hopes dwindling. Emily felt the stranger held the key to Samuel's mystery. The bone and the stranger's reaction pointed to something sinister. Emily and Mark sensed a growing darkness. Lost and found. A trail gone cold. The search for Samuel was extensive but yielded little. Personal belongings were found near a ravine. The investigation reached a dead end. Samuel's family clung to hope for answers. Emily felt the stranger's disorientation aligned with Samuel's timeline. Theories and speculation, unraveling the mystery. Samuel's disappearance became a local legend. Theories ranged from mountain lions to phantom hikers. Emily was drawn to the stranger's connection to the ravine. The mountains blurred the lines between reality and legend. Mark suggested logical explanations, but Emily felt otherwise. A mother's anguish, hope dies last. Eleanor never gave up hope for Samuel. She searched tirelessly, clinging to his memory. News of the hikers and the stranger reached her. A fragile hope ignited within her. Could this be her Samuel trying to find his way home? As darkness descended, the hikers felt an oppressive silence. The stranger's silence grew ominous. Emily watched him, sensing his burden. The air grew colder as they approached the ravine. The forest seemed to press in, watching them. The mountain held its breath, waiting. The stranger stopped abruptly at the very edge of the ravine, his silhouette a stark outline against the moonlit sky. A gasp escaped Emily's lips as she realized just how close he was to the edge. One step, one gust of wind, and he would be gone, swallowed by the darkness that yawned beneath him. Mark, ever vigilant, reached out a hand to steady the stranger, but he pulled away, his body tense, his gaze fixed on something in the distance. Emily followed his line of sight, but she could see nothing but the swirling mist and the ghostly outlines of the trees, their branches twisted and gnarled like skeletal fingers reaching up from the depths. Samuel? A voice barely a whisper broke the silence. It was John, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and recognition. "Is that you?" The stranger slowly turned, his face finally illuminated by the beam of Mark's headlamp. Time seemed to stand still as they stared at him, their breaths caught in their throats. The years melted away, revealing not the haggard, ghostly figure they had come to expect, but the face of a young man, frozen in time. It was Samuel. But how? Emily felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. The ground seemed to shift beneath her feet, the line between reality and nightmare blurring before her eyes. The stories, the whispers, the legend of the phantom hiker, it was all true. But how could this be? "It is you," Samuel breathed, his voice a raspy whisper, as if unused for years. "You remember me." A wave of emotions washed over their faces: shock, disbelief, and a growing sense of dread. The Samuel standing before them was not the weathered and haggard figure they had expected, but a young man barely older than they were, his features frozen in a timeless portrait of youth. But his eyes, those hauntingly familiar eyes that had stared back at them from missing person posters and faded photographs, held a depth of sadness, a weariness that belied his youthful appearance. "But how?" Emily finally managed to stammer, her voice barely audible above the wind that whipped around them. Everyone thought." Samuel lowered his gaze, his shoulders slumping as if a great weight had settled upon them. "It's a long story," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "A story I never thought I'd have the chance to tell." As the hikers gathered closer, their initial shock giving way to a growing sense of urgency, Samuel began to speak, his voice gaining strength with each passing word. He recounted a tale so incredible, so chilling, that it sent shivers down their spines and made them question the very nature of reality. He spoke of a hidden crevice, a chasm masked by shadows and mist, that he had stumbled upon all those years ago. A place where time seemed to flow differently, where the laws of nature were bent and twisted. He spoke of being trapped, lost in a labyrinth of echoing tunnels and shifting passageways, his cries for help swallowed by the darkness. As the hikers listened, their hearts pounding in their chests, they realized that they were racing against time. The sun was sinking fast below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the mountain. Soon, darkness would envelop them, making the already treacherous descent even more perilous. "We need to get off this mountain," Mark said, his voice firm despite the tremor of fear that ran through him. "Now!" They had almost reached the point where the trail leveled out, where the treacherous descent gave way to a more forgiving path when it happened. A thick blanket of fog, as cold and dense as a shroud, rolled in, engulfing them in an eerie whiteout. Visibility dropped to mere feet, the familiar landmarks of the trail disappearing into the swirling mist. "Stay close!" Mark shouted, his voice barely audible above the wind that seemed to rise with the fog, whipping through the trees with a vengeance. "Don't let go of each other!" Emily, her heart pounding in her chest, reached out, her gloved hand closing around John's jacket, seeking comfort in his presence. But the moment she touched him, a jolt of static electricity seemed to pass between them, and then he was gone, vanished into thin air, as if he had never been there at all. "John!" Emily cried out, her voice shrill with panic, her headlamp beam darting back and forth, searching for any sign of her friend. "John, where are you?" But there was no answer, only the mournful sigh of the wind through the trees and the chilling realization that they were alone, lost in a fog that seemed to hold its breath, waiting to swallow them whole. The mountain stood silent, an impassive observer of the unfolding drama, its slopes holding the answers to a mystery that stretched back decades. The search parties, their hopes dashed against the rocks of speculation and the unyielding wilderness, eventually retreated, leaving the mountain to its secrets. The legend of the phantom hiker lived on, whispered around campfires and in hushed tones in the taverns of the small mountain town, a chilling reminder that some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Emily and Mark, forever changed by their encounter on the mountain, struggled to reconcile their experience with the rational world they knew. They returned to their lives, but the mountain, with its haunting beauty and its shroud of unanswered questions, remained a constant presence in their thoughts. They carried with them the weight of that night, the chilling realization that the line between reality and the supernatural was thin indeed, easily blurred by the mists of time and the shadows of the wilderness. The memory of Samuel, both the young man frozen in time and the phantom hiker forever wandering the trails, haunted their dreams. They often found themselves gazing up at the mountain, drawn to its rugged beauty and its air of mystery, wondering if Samuel was still out there, trapped somewhere in between worlds, his spirit tethered to the place where he had vanished. Was it their imagination, or did they sometimes catch a fleeting glimpse of a solitary figure on the distant slopes, a figure that seemed to watch them, a silent guardian of the mountain's secrets? The mountain, it seemed, was not finished with them yet. The phantom hiker, a figure of folklore and fear, became a symbol of the mountain's enduring mystery. Was he a lost soul, forever searching for a way out of the wilderness that had claimed him? Or was he a guardian, a protector of the mountain's secrets, warning those who dared to venture too close to the edge of the unknown? The mountain, with its rugged beauty and its air of ancient wisdom, held the answers, but it was in no hurry to reveal them. It stood silent, its slopes shrouded in mist and shadow, its secrets whispered on the wind, waiting for those brave enough or foolish enough to seek them out. The trail, though unseen, beckoned, a silent invitation to explore the hidden corners of the world, to confront the shadows that lurk at the edge of our perception, and to discover that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we carry within ourselves. The phantom hiker, a cautionary tale or a beacon of hope, remained an enigma, a reminder that some journeys never truly end, and that the wilderness, both within and without, is a place of endless mystery and wonder.